Alright, it's still morning, right?
It is.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank y'all for being here. My name is Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, and on behalf of Governor Whitmer and I want to welcome you here to this meeting about how we make cities thrive in Michigan. How do we improve the quality of life for people who live in cities in Michigan? That proportion of people is only going to grow. And so our administration is taking what we feel like is a really important and exciting step of going and meeting people in cities across the state where they are. The governor and I personally facilitating 16 or 17 different meetings in cities across the state of Michigan to talk about how we can make our cities thrive. More and more people are going to live in cities, as I said, and so we want to think about how can we go about this process. And so what we thought was we wanted to bring a set of people to the table, people who are doing the work of community building, people who are doing the work of solving problems for people here in the state of Michigan, for people who live in cities. We've divided what we feel like the set of issues are really into 5 key areas, and that's really what we want to focus these conversations on. First area is kids in cities, improving life quality for kids who live in cities. The second is on generational economic opportunity. The third is affordable and available housing. The fourth, environmental quality and justice. And the fifth is on transportation and mobility. We feel like if we can move the ball forward in these 5 areas, that it can really improve the quality of life overall. We also think these 5 buckets are representative in a way that regardless of what other issues may be most important or maybe front of mind for you, that they will interact or intersect with these 5 areas in one or more ways that can be important. We invited all of you here to the table because you are doing work in one or more of these areas. And we believe that the people who are doing the work, the people who are directly impacted by these challenges or by public policy are also the people who are closest to the solutions in these areas. And so we want to hear from you. So we are coming to you to understand your experiences, your perspective, so that we can emerge from this meeting and from the meetings that we're doing all around the state of Michigan, starting in Detroit last month, finishing up probably in early November, with an agenda that's been set collectively, that's looking at these 5 areas, an agenda that will describe actions that can be taken at every level, the city level, the state level through executive action, the state level through legislation, or at the federal level, things that we need to advocate our federal government for to improve quality of life in cities. So I want to thank you all for coming here and being part of the conversation. I'm looking forward to it being robust. I have a short presentation to go through that is responsive to the survey that all of you completed before coming to the meeting, which I appreciate. Then sort of give some of our perspective and our understanding of what some of these challenges look like. And then we'll get into a discussion about how to move forward. But before that, I'd like to go around the table, have everyone introduce themselves and say what just the organization you represent. That's all. Okay, no soliloquies yet. Okay. Representative, please start with you.
Good morning, Vanessa Guerra. I serve as the state representative for the 95th district.
Good morning, everyone. Clint Bryant, Saginaw City Council.
Good morning, everyone. Mike Hanley, Chair of the County's Economic Development Commission, member of the City's Economic Development Commission, Vice Chair of the Downtown Development Authority, and the County Clerk.
Wow.
Autumn Scherzer of the Saginaw County Business and Education Partnership, but also with the City Council.
Good morning, I'm Glendora Lawrence. I'm with the Elton Jones Neighborhood Association.
Smallwood Holland, Saginaw Community Foundation.
Early Comey, pastor, second generation pastor.
Ted Miller, Saginaw Future.
Carl Williams, first Vice President and Chair of the Political Action Committee for Saginaw County NAACP.
Bishop Larry Campbell, the pastor of New Birth Missionary Pedro and the city of commissioners on Charles for Saginaw.
Good morning, I'm Leslie Fox from the Saginaw Housing Commission.
Good morning, Michelle McGregor, First Word Community Service.
Hi, I'm Kathy Conklin from the Saginaw County Business and Education Partnership.
Vote Floyd Clark, City of Saginaw Mayor.
Tori McAfee, Buena Vista Charter Township.
Good morning, Jessica Hernandez, Ezekiel Project.
Renee Johnston, Saginaw Community Foundation, and if I can just say welcome to the Saginaw Community Foundation.
This is beautiful. So,
Thank you. Good morning, Dawn Goodrow, Eastside Soup Kitchen, Dawn of a New Day Coffee House here in downtown, DSA and DDA.
Amos O'Neill, member of the Saginaw County Board of Commissioners here in Saginaw.
thank you all for being here. So, all right, I gotta move to the other side of the table because this doesn't work now here. So with that, we're gonna start with, this is also the ground us. So this email address on the screen here, adjacent to these meetings that we're doing around the state, we do have a public comment process for people who are unable to participate in these conversations, but still obviously have a lot of things to offer. So we'd like you to please share this email address far and wide. It's also something that you can send us feedback on this meeting. If you have additional ideas that you didn't get a chance to bring up in this meeting, you can share them here. If anything, that's the network email address that Steve will be able to look at and do everything. We'll also have online very shortly, we will have links to the presentation that we've given here in Saginaw and the presentation that we've given in other cities in the state as well, so you can see some of those differences, as well as videos from the events all around the state. We are recording this meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have been streaming all these meetings on Facebook Live as well, so people can, again, if they're not able to be here physically, can still participate, and that the archive of those videos will also be available online for you to see what this conversation has looked like all across the state. Sir, can you introduce yourself to the group?
Terry Pruitt. I'm president of our local NAACP here in Saginaw.
All right, thank you for being here. So, let's get started. So, again, thank you all for completing the survey that we sent out before the meeting. We sent that out really to try to help scope the conversation that we're going to have today. And what this slide is showing that 75% of those of you who responded to the survey said that generational economic opportunity was either the first or second most important to you of those 5 buckets. First or second, this is a little bit of some of the commentary about people thinking there was the stubborn issue of generational poverty, the many economic developments that excluded people of color, that this idea that your future generation will be more prosperous or have more opportunities than your previous generation, that doesn't feel like it's as true as it once was. So dealing with this question of intergenerational poverty or generational economic opportunity was, again, the first or second most important thing to those who responded. So we're going to get into that question a little bit later. But I want to talk about some of the other issues as well to kind of round this off. So everyone didn't pick that because they're number one. So we want to feel like you're included as well. So this slide is just showing that there have been some positive headlines, some positive stories about what's happening in this community, in this region. Job fairs for students in Saginaw Valley, about Saginaw transit riders. I care about that. I was a transit rider in Detroit for almost 3 years before I became lieutenant governor. What's happening in the public schools and the libraries for the transformation process, and again, more with transportation and understanding how important that is to connect people to opportunity and the healthcare and the educational experiences. Now, I want to take a minute though and tell a story. So. This is a woman named Jacquees Purifoy. She is a Detroiter. And her story, I think, highlights it highlights one, I think, just the straight up resilience of people who live in Michigan. It highlights some of the challenges that many young people who live in cities in Michigan face. It also represents how some of them are able to overcome. So Jacquees was born in the city of Detroit. That's her, one of her baby pictures in the top corner. I resonate with that picture because I have an 11-week-old at home right now. And she grew up, she went to a combination of Detroit Public Schools and the Catholic school, growing up through high school. And Jacquees had a baby herself when she was 16. And she persisted through any challenges that raised for her, ended up going through school, going to the University of Michigan, it's a great school, in case anybody was wondering, it's a great school. And she ended up graduating from Michigan. She ended up going to law school, graduated from law school. She has been active in the community in Detroit, running something called Detroit Soup, which is this very interesting sort of community program. Everybody comes, they put money on the table, they eat dinner, and they fund a project collectively. And Jacquees' daughter, here on the bottom right-hand corner here, that's her daughter in high school. She's now a senior at Michigan State University. Jacquees, she has overcome a lot. She has had a lot of situations where systems have failed her, and she has risen to the challenge to overcome what she's faced. Jacquees is staring at more than $280,000 in student loan debt right now. It's crippling to her and her economic opportunity. But someone who was as resilient, as intelligent, as hungry as she is, imagine if there were not these barriers to her opportunity and her success. Imagine what someone like her could achieve. Imagine what children all across this state could achieve if we provided them with opportunity rather than putting barriers between them and opportunity. So I tell her story as one of many, of millions, frankly, in the state of Michigan, that we can enable. This is really about how we can enable imagination and possibility that lives really within every person, within every child in our state. And her story is, I think, one truly inspirational. So shifting gears a little bit, so we're talking about some of the challenges that do exist in cities. These headlines, and you all are from here doing the work, but just we have seen some things that have made life challenging for a lot of people. Shortage of affordable housing. Some differences. So there actually is a little more equity in how this is distributed here in Saginaw than it has been in other places. In other places, first of all, we had a place that had a zero for mobility and transportation, which I found interesting. We also, the distribution and having housing being so high here, so while not being the sort of the number one issue, but being so high on this list, I think really is something that speaks to a specific challenge that we need to make sure that we're responsive to here in this community. But I want to let you know kind of what the distribution was in terms of people selecting this as their number one issue. All right, so let's start with housing. So what this is looking at Saginaw, the city of Saginaw in particular, and this is looking at some average costs to own a home, to rent a home, what that income will require. And those bottom two numbers, looking at the average wage and minimum wage, what that means is, if you had the average wage in Saginaw, you would need to work 50 hours a week in order to own. If you had the average minimum wage here in Saginaw, you need to work 65 hours a week in order to have a home. All that means is Saginaw does not meet the standard for having affordable housing, meaning that you're spending 30% or less of your income in order to afford your housing. So therefore, it's no surprise to me that affordable and available housing bubbled up as one of the top issues for the conversation amongst those who responded to our survey. In terms of generational economic opportunity, we have here the median income of Saginaw being just under $30,000. This unemployment rate, 15.4%. And let me stop you before you start asking me questions about that unemployment number. What that means, so staff will correct me if I don't say this properly. This number is pretty specific. It's talking about people who are 16 or over, who are currently looking for work and are not retired. The unemployment rate amongst that population is 15.4%. There are other ways to sort of measure their unemployment that are perhaps more broad or more inclusive, but that's this specific number we're looking at. It's kind of sort of this active labor force who's over the age of 16 and currently looking for work. We've seen that about 15%. And then for education, showing that 20% of adults in Saginaw have a post-secondary degree. That means that's not counting professional, like technical certification. That means an associate's degree or higher from a college or university. 20%. Any questions about that?
Can I ask you, is there any calculation for the unemployment rate for those who are no longer in the system with you?
So this number does not include that. So we can get you that number that includes people who are no longer searching for work. But this number does not include that. But yeah, that's a number that we can obtain.
That would bring that number down.
Yes, it would. It would. So that's why I wanted to give some context for that specific figure when we're talking about active labor force. When talking about environmental quality and justice, really what we're trying to look at here is the fact that many times when we've had, whether it's industry or other factors that have impacted the environment in a negative way, we see this often dangerous intersection between those environmental impacts and their proximity to people who are low income or low wealth, to communities of color. And so we want to look at that intersection and how can we address from a program, from a policy standpoint, how do we address and roll back those impacts? Because we've seen that lead to very dangerous health outcomes, for example, for children and families in these particular areas. Also, when we're talking about families struggling to make ends meet, these impacts often lead to very high energy costs for them. And also it impacts the ability for children and families to recreate freely in these areas. So when we talk about environmental quality and justice, that's a little bit about what we're talking about. For kids and cities, we have sort of compared to the state of Michigan what we're seeing in the city of Saginaw in terms of graduation rates in high school, dropout rates in high school, the percentage or proportion of children who live in poverty, and also the percentage or proportion of children who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And so what this shows is that we have a lot of work to do in a number of these areas, particularly with children who are living in poverty. And so we want to work to address this. And mobility and transportation, yes, that includes roads and infrastructure. Yes, it includes making sure our bridges are safe. Yes, it includes congestion traffic, but also includes transportation, public transportation, bus system, something again I care very deeply about making sure that works for people, that it's affordable, that it's safe, that it's convenient, and that it works. So a little bit about, y'all know that we are in the midst of a budget making process. We are in the midst of a budget making process. It's got more interesting than that. But just a little bit about the budget that we proposed on March 5th. It's important to say that we proposed a budget on March 5th. It is not March 5th, it is September the 9th, I believe. And in that budget, we proposed a number of things that we believe are responsive to these 5 areas. When we're talking about kids in the city, we're talking about education. Our budget proposal put on the table a once-in-a-generation investment in education. That $507 million in 1 year, one budget year, is the most that has ever been put forward. Most has been put forward since the year 2002 when it comes to spending in education. That includes an increase in the per pupil spend for every district. It includes an increase in the amount of funds available for children with special needs, children who are at higher risk of coming into contact with the criminal justice system, for career and technical education programs, triples the state fund that funds literacy coaches to deal with our reading attainment scores, because we're the only state in the country that's seen our reading scores decline in the last 10 years. Really puts a bold investment in education on the table. For transit and transportation, includes an additional more than $60 million for transportation mobility projects that are focused on improving access to transportation for elderly people and people with disabilities in particular, because if we can solve transit and mobility challenges for those communities, we believe those solutions will then apply to the broader community at large. For environmental quality and justice, we put forward $120 million to be spent on water cleanup projects, whether that's lead-heavy contaminants, PFAS, service line replacements, as well as an additional $60 million to install hydration stations in schools. Now, this is important because the research has shown that the place that children are often most exposed to lead-heavy contaminants in their water is in old school buildings. So this $60 million, we proposed that as a way to install hydration stations in these old school buildings and reduce children's risk of coming in contact with contaminated water. In terms of closing the skills gap, we put forward 2 programs that will help us meet the goal the governor set during the State of the State, which was 60%, 3 out of every 5 people, adults in the state of Michigan, having some sort of post-secondary attainment, meaning they had some kind of degree, associate's degree, bachelor's, master's, et cetera. They had some sort of technical certification or training. We put forward the Michigan Reconnect program that provides a tuition-free pathway for any person 25 or older to receive technical training and certification. We do not want cost to be a barrier between someone, in front of someone getting the skills they need to get the job that they want. And then we also proposed something called the Michigan Opportunity Initiative, which is for every child, a high school graduate who earns a B average or more, will have a tuition-free pathway to community college, first state in the region, the Midwest, to offer that to students. And also, if they want to go to a 4-year institution, that they would have a debt-free pathway to the first 2 years of a 4-year college school. And then finally, on roads and infrastructure, our proposal put forth $2.5 billion with a B to fix our roads and infrastructure. And we need that much money because we have the worst roads in the country. Period, full stop. So we tried to be responsive in our budget proposal to helping improve quality of life in cities. And so we proposed these things, but our agenda is a collectively set one. Our agenda is set in conversations all around the state like this one. And so, again, I'd ask that all of you engage in this process beyond this conversation. As was said in one of the first meetings we had, this is not a one-off, it is a one-of conversation, one of many conversations that we need to have about improving quality of life in cities. And so with that, thank you for indulging me with this particular presentation. But now I'd like to open up the floor. And when thinking about how do we improve access to generational economic opportunity, whatever that phrase means to you, what sorts of programs, practices, or policies, so the programs, practices, or policies, what are the things that we can do, what are the levers that we can pull that would increase access to generational economic opportunity in this community? Yes, please.
Fund community ventures, and we have experts here, but Saginaw County hired 2,000, right, roughly? 2,400 folks that were sort of institutionally unemployed over 10 years, including ex-felons. And next year, Covenant and Morley companies were the 3 biggest. So those, I mean, to me, that's the most transformational economic development program that I've been in economic development for 20 years, and it's the only program that addressed underserved populations. And so, I think funding that, we hired more folks in that category in Saginaw County than in Wayne County or anywhere else in the state. And I think it's a testament to our employers and the lack of available talent for our employers that they, went out on a limb and hired folks with, nonviolent felonies, and folks that hadn't worked in over a decade. I think that program really moved the needle. Saginaw County has just under 200,000 population, so if you take 2,000, 2,500 folks that have not worked in more than a decade, to me that's a pretty simple and this is the expert right here. So we just worked on the employer side, but a lot of the people in the room here are in the trenches on that, so I think that was the one thing to do.
The thing with that too is we can measure return on investment, and so there's not a lot of programs that you can do that with. And so clearly that investment of giving some incentives to employers to hire. One thing we didn't push in that program, so as we look at like a 2.0, we could use bonding from federal programs, and then also tax credits. That we didn't really understand that with community ventures of how powerful that could be if we had that. But it really, and Autumn can say too, she's another success coach. We still have people come in that need that service, and it's especially as we look at the Alice population, people who are employed, that are just, you know, one paycheck away, that get a layoff for a week or two or a month, it impacts them greatly. So to have that kind of supportive service is a game changer. So, we're gonna come with a proposal in the next few weeks of what a 2.0 would look like. But that clearly, it gave, we believe jobs are like the anchor for a good life. And, you can, that's like the one significant thing. And if we can get the community resources around that, we can make a big difference in Saginaw. And saw that, with, you know, 22,400 people. I mean, we really thought we had a few hundred when we started, but there's so many more. I mean, SAG program, it's now part of Michigan Works and it's taken on a different, way. But if we could look at how to make that more robust, that would be good.
And the retention rate for the employers was like 90%. So they have a better retention rate with this group of population than they do with the general population. These are people that are dying to work, but they didn't have a resume, they didn't have a shirt to wear at an interview, they didn't have childcare, transportation, and that's what these folks did to wrap around those services to, you know, give that leg up to those individuals. It was really sad to see it go.
It really wasn't 90% though, so, so I don't want you to, and I appreciate, cause it's like you're a supporter, but, so we were like after a year, 76%, but we were in a couple of companies that were less than 50%. And every place we were at, that the people that were part of this program outweighed the, retention rate of their other employees. And so that's one thing we know for sure.
That's great, thank you.
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
My choice to be transparent was, kids in the survey. I feel that we should recognize the fact that a majority of students are not going to go to college. So we need to concentrate more on skilled trade type of job. And I see that our students aren't ready in math, the whole STEM area. So I think that's an area that needs to be looked into.
So just to see if I can capture that properly, so you're saying that, if we can invest in specifically preparing students in terms of math, STEM, math and science, prepare them for pathways in skilled trades, so we can make deeper investments in those areas, that would hit two league buckets, both kids in city as well as generational.
You said that perfectly.
Don't make sure I was listening. So, okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, when the automotive industry was prevalent in the valley, education was not something that was emphasized. Well, that's flipped now. And no matter how you put it, when you talk about leverage or leverage you can use, any kind of leverage that would enhance the resources for education, whether it be as in public school education or in skills training. One of the things that we have run into as an organization is going to construction companies and saying, we want to see more diversity. And the answer is, okay, give me someone who's qualified to do this. To me, if we can have enough individuals in the pipeline, and that is a process that's definitely starting now with, say, the Saginaw Career Complex, for instance, putting more diversity in the pipeline so that we can supply that kind of individual with the kind of skills that you need to do those kinds of things. If you ask what kind of leverage would be, any kind of leverage that can enhance education, again, whether it's in public schools or skills, because education is the key. That's the key to flipping it. And without it, it's failing. Without it, it's failing.
Is there anything different you think we should do, or is it just we need to fully fund it?
I don't mean to be cute, but I don't think it's a secret to anybody in this room. I think we know what to do. I I think the issue has always been who wants to put emphasis where. I think just, as I said, just enhancing, if we know, for instance, that a community is lacking in terms of bringing kids up to snuff on whatever kind of testing or resources they need, then to do our best to make sure that that's done. Because it's plain for anyone to see that a kid that goes to a school with all kinds of resources automatically does better than a kid that goes to a school where the teacher has to help by paying for things out of her pocketbook or his pocketbook. I know it's been months now, but I like the budget that you have. But if we could just put emphasis there, I don't have a magic wand, probably the knowledge to tell you specifically how to do it, but I just know that education in those two areas will definitely help. And if we don't do it, it will just further the problem that we're having.
Sure. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes, sir. And then
Just to follow up Carl's comments, because we did we had a presentation yesterday with some of the ISD folks and our career complex in our public school system talking about career technical education. One of the emphasis was on the Marshall Plan that was started under Governor Schneider. And the concern I have walking away from a presentation like that is that we don't get caught up in the flavor of the day, the short-term funding of a very, I think, worthwhile program and service in our community. And so what I'd like to do is encourage you and the governor to consider long-term funding of that kind of programming in an urban community like Saginaw. There are success coaches at our two high schools that you've mentioned that were funded out of that grant. I know the dollars are limited, and we heard yesterday that there are only a handful of communities that are participating in the Marshall Plan. But what I don't want to see is 2 years from now, all of that funding goes away or gets shifted to another community, and we're just gearing up, getting ready to make it happen in Saginaw, and all of a sudden it just disappears. So at least for your 4 years in office, make a commitment to at least keep it there and make it happen in Saginaw.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that you're talking about the risk of funding flavors of the month. One of the reasons that we continue to revisit that, or we have to revisit that, is because of just how education funding works in Michigan. And so I think that if we're talking about a long-term conversation, there's a long-term conversation we had about how we fund schools and the way we do it and why.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's a conversation, that structural conversation, I think, is outside of the budget making process that we're focused on now. But the way I take your point more broadly is to say that we should entertain what it looks like to fund schools differently and more robust, in addition to making sure that those kind of programs are there for people. So appreciate that.
Well, and I think that that's a perfect segue to what I was, in a sense, going to say. I mean, as I look at where you've really stressed and focused the majority of the budget on education, it's knowing really how to strategize that. I mean, you're committing a lot of money to education, which is wonderful, but how does that filter down to all of our individual school districts?
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're to look at literacy coaches, and you said you want to, that it's going to support literacy coaches in our schools. I'm proud to say that the Saginaw Community Foundation, we supported our ISD so they could fund an additional literacy coach, because how those dollars were distributed across the state may not have really met the needs of our individual school ISDs. So there's, of course, has to be a strategy as to how you really filter that money down across. I mean, because let's face it, I mean, we know, unfortunately, we have a state of Michigan educational agenda that we need to address and focus on. But I mean, how are we going to strategize that? So whether it's long-term funding for these key areas, but then to make sure it's filtering down, I'm not even going to say equally or whatever it is, but I mean, how are we going to make sure that how that money does funnel down to all of our school districts, that it is going to help us address some of the issues we need to address? whether it's literacy, whether it's STEM, whatever. So it's just really knowing what that strategy is, so our school districts know how to utilize that funding effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, the way that we put this proposal forward is trying to recognize a couple of things. One is that the research is, basically unequivocal that it costs more to educate children when they're fighting with persistent poverty. And so, when we're talking about how we can equitably distribute funds, one needs to be responsive to that fact. We have, in the design of this, also taken into heavy consideration the recommendation from the consortium on, this consortium basically of, school leaders, from around the state, who put together a pretty comprehensive recommendation about what school funding needed to look like in our budget. We really the first in the state of Michigan that have been truly responsive to that, from those leaders, looking at what does this actually look like and how does this break it down. Different school districts have different needs, to your point. Different school districts have different levels of support. Every school district, unfortunately, does not have a great community foundation to partner with. And so how do we recognize that and be responsive is sort of what we try to think about with this proposal. But we have to, I think, putting the dollars forward, really this is about protecting the dollars that are supposed to be in education that have not been for a number of budget years because they've been used to do things like fix potholes inadequately. This is what we're trying to shift, with our approach towards the budget process. So I appreciate that. So, this gets at a good thing, and I'm happy to broaden the conversation a little bit. So, everybody did not pick generational economic opportunity as a no motivation, right? Somebody picked environmental equality. Somebody picked mobility and transportation. So for someone who did not choose generational economic opportunity, it would be great if you could speak to why that was your most important issue and how you would connect that to the consensus challenge of generational economic opportunity. And yeah, I figured you would tell us.
I'm sure no one around this table is surprised to hear me say this, but so transportation is really big for me, both personally and professionally. I think that it matters most because we have amazing programming in this town. I mean, you can hear about all the incredible efforts around this table, but unfortunately, lack of transportation is impacting people's access to all of them. We have an aging population, and that is also going to be starting to play out pretty seriously in this community. And we really see that not only are public transits around the state having a hard time staying afloat, but they're not financially able to be innovative in the way that I think that we really need to if we're really going to connect people to all of the other programs that we're funding. So we're really on the chopping block this time with the budget, and that really scares me, not only because we might not be able to expand the way that we hope to, but also because we might not be able to even maintain what we do, which is really just the bare minimum. And so I see us, public transit, really being that connection that we need to maintain and to grow and to look forward. And what does public transit of the future look like? Does it look like buses? Does it look like cars? Does it look like Lyft and Uber? There's no reason why public systems can't do things like that. But until we can stabilize and then begin to work on those next steps, we're in a tough spot. Thank you.
From the soup kitchen perspective, I picked that as number 2, also because the folks that are served at the soup kitchen, they do not have access to food. Our groceries are further and further out, and folks do not have the access that they should have to the full service groceries that they should have to have a healthy lifestyle. And so I put that as that's a concern for the people that are served there, and the lack of food access. I also concur with the Community Ventures program because many of the population that are served at the soup kitchen are former felons and returning citizens, and we are trying to work with that population to decrease numbers at the soup kitchen because they are a high population that are served. And I did find out also that they do not receive any SNAP benefits. So, not sure they can't get a job, but they can't get food stamps. And so, if, maybe there's something that can be done for the folks that have been formerly incarcerated. And also, it's drug felonies, which now are being, some of the drug felons were for drugs that are now being, decriminalized. So, there's a big issue there. There's also the issue, with food stamps that are now, folks need to, perform community service in order to get food stamps or cash assistance. And so, the state has sent them to community service centers, with no regard to letting the community service centers know that we would be getting an influx of people that need to volunteer at our places. No forms, no dollars, no education to us, just people showing up saying they have to do community service. So, it's been something that we've had to figure out with no extra resources, to accommodate, folks that need it to live. And, we've done it, to the best of our ability. But the other thing that comes into play is getting there, the transportation, scheduling them, and then they can't get there because there's no transportation. The children, who's going to watch them? I mean, it's snowballed into more issues, more barriers, and I understand what possibly they're trying to do, but it's not working like it could. I hear about success coaches and mentors, and maybe that's what folks need. If you're going to get food benefits or cash, maybe you get a live person that actually shows you how you could possibly benefit from those dollars, and stretch them and use them, instead of working and multiplying more issues in your life, because that's what I see.
For me, environmental justice and kids in the city and generational economic opportunities kind of go hand in hand. When you talk about kids in the city and you listed those things that were priority areas, it occurred to me that one of the intrinsic values for kids, believe it or not, has nothing to do with medical coverage for kids, has nothing to do with jobs for kids, has nothing at all to do with schools for kids. It has everything to do with play. And in Saginaw, with no recreation, with very few recreational opportunities. And this is not a criticism of the city government, it's just the reality of the fact that our funding level for the city is capped at a certain level, which limits the opportunity. And so then you look at the city of Saginaw, they are not only food deserts, they're not only job deserts for 13, 14-year-old young people who cannot get a summer job because they're not available, because they weren't hired, 13, 14-year-olds. So they don't have the privilege of developing a work ethic early in their lives, because their 18-year-old brother or sister who didn't graduate from high school and go to college can't find a good level entry job. I actually talked to the president of Dow Chemical a meeting a couple years ago, and I said, tell me how many jobs you have for people who have no education beyond a high school job. How many entry-level jobs? They said, we have none. So then you have no entry-level job that a person can get in and possibly work their way for their family, to provide an example for a youngster who might live up to that. So these deserts are bigger than just something. The Community Ventures program has great successes, but there is a great void that could not fit in the Community Ventures program, because the Community Ventures program could not overcome certain barriers that pre-existed and that persisted. For instance, the whole idea of felonies. There are companies that just won't hire. They're not gonna hire. You know, we went through the whole thing about the check the box, the whole situation. There's a lot of people who would have qualified for a community venture opportunity if the locations would have hired people with certain kinds of felonies, especially with what's going on now. So if you take that into account and just think that environmental justice is not only helping young people escape from the vestiges of lead poisoning, but it's having them experience outdoor recreation, outdoor activities. There is no way that a city that does not have a recreation department, a recreation program, can approach the national federal funding to develop local programs. Or even state funding is very difficult for programs. You can get bricks and mortar, but not programs. It's a program. So, we got the programs that people can go to, but, and then transportation and access. You know, here's a city, I'll just say this, when you talk about generational economic opportunities, here's a city where 40 years ago, a person graduated from high school, they could go to work where their father or their mother worked because there was a job there, and they could expect that they could work there, retire there, raise their families there, and then their children would have an opportunity because the people in Saginaw did work. It wasn't career oriented like now. You know, we talk about you gotta have a career. You know, people just want to work, and there is not an opportunity. So there may be a need to look at how economic development in this state can work with local communities and create entry-level, non-academically prepared jobs like warehousing, things of that nature, so people can get a living wage and a job that doesn't require. And then find ways that we can work with local communities, develop local recreational programming, and not just the facility, but the program. I think there's some areas that are still available for recreation, but program.
I appreciate that. One of the things you talk about, just to speak directly to the ways that the state can and should and is supposed to, frankly, partner with municipalities from a money standpoint. Another piece that was part of our budget proposal to put forward was an increase in revenue sharing in the state with municipalities. Typically, we think of revenue sharing, we think about it in terms of firefighters and police officers, but that is revenue sharing that cities will use to meet whatever city priorities are.
Especially if it's earmarked. You know, you wanna find, if you really want to know what priorities are, you look at somebody's checkbook and what they spend their money on. If there's no money that's earmarked for kids' activities, then that's a good chance.
So for affordable housing, we have a challenge that a lot of the people that are utilizing our service for affordable housing still struggle with, even if they have a job, they still may struggle to maintain helping their children in school. So you have all those challenges, and they're so they're strapped where if something happens, they may lose their housing, even though it's affordable to them. So we offer the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, and we offer resources to help them become self-sufficient or become offer food assistance or cash assistance from the state. But one of those issues is that we're only given money to provide them resources to send them somewhere else. So then they have to go to all these different places in order to get assistance. Michigan Works, et cetera. So we're partnering with the First Ward Community Services, where at their community center, they're gonna host an Envision Center, so that any resources that the family may need, they're able to get them in one location, so that they can have, the mobility issues. Once they get there, then at least they can have access to all those things at one particular time. But the other issue for affordable housing here is there is a stigma around it. So right now, we're kind of capped at where we are, instead of growing that to meet the needs of the affordable housing in the city or the county. We do need to look at ways that we can provide that we can to meet the need of the community.
What do you think the state could help with? What could the state could help with?
we need more funding. If we had more funding that we could expand our housing, then we definitely could help more families. Because we're looking into other opportunities in developing and for affordable housing, but we don't have enough funding to do so. And then if there was a way with the way the scoring was, for Michigan, you go through a scoring process to get tax credits. Because we don't have any grocery stores here, then that's a problem where our score is so low, so we won't get points to get the proper tax credit to actually qualify for a 9% tax credit. We could easily qualify for a 4%, but you need more funding for a 9% without going to separate, different private funding equities.
All the ideas have been exhausted.
Just for a trailer on the environmental justice, I just don't want us to forget, and I don't know how much, governor's office and your office can do about it, but when we're talking environmental pieces, I don't want us to forget that a part of the environmental injustice that we suffer is one community being loaded with cigarettes signs, with liquor signs. And if anybody's read the history of cool cigarettes, they know what I'm talking about. We need to look at cleaning that up also. And I say that because everything I've heard around the table sounds good to me, but I'm mentioning this just in terms of us making sure that we take a holistic approach to it. And environmental justice also includes taking down signs that talk about how cool cigarettes are, and knowing that they're loaded with menthol, and I still think that menthol is addictive. But targeting certain communities, certain populations just for that. And the proof of that to me again is you just ride around this town, and you will see they're in one area, and in other areas they're not.
Yes, I appreciate that. I mean, we took some pretty important action very recently.
Yes, you
in
did.
terms of flavored
Yes.
vaping products that we
Yes.
think are incredibly dangerous, particularly to children. And we're in the rulemaking process now to implement an emergency ban on those products because it's been unfortunate that since that news has broken about our action at the state level, that you have seen more and more news across the country about illnesses, lung challenges related to vaping products. And so we certainly share this concern, and that was one example where we tried to take action, and there's work to be done, and we think it's our absolute number one priority to protect our members. So I had I'm sorry, and then we'll come back.
To touch on the affordable housing problem, you see here in Saginaw and in Flint and Detroit all the blight being removed, but we increasingly have a challenge where people are unable to purchase homes. They have poor credit because of the past with loans, but also just people they're barely able to pay their bills, much less save any money for a down payment for a home. So we have this mismatch, right? We have all these homes that are in decline because they're not occupied. Our population is going down, but yet we can't get people to buy them in a place where they're able to buy them. And so I feel like in order to really to transform people into a more stable financial place, home ownership is a big part of that. And so in order to be able to take all this housing stock that we've got, but either before it declines or to try to get it back once it has gotten a ways down that road to a place where people are able to afford to buy them, with coaching about how to budget and all those kinds of things so that they're ready should anything happen to that home that they have to sink some money into. That would be transformational for our families. I mean, our home values have increased a lot over the past 6 or 7 years, but even then, a mortgage payment is less than half what rents are going for here. It would make a humongous difference to our families to be able to actually purchase homes. And I think there's a lot of potential with land banks across the state to be able to be that transformational change.
I just wanted to raise a success story in Pat that could add to that.
I'm sorry.
I thought
You have one.
Oh, it's my turn? Okay, thank you.
yeah, I was pointing you forward with that, okay.
Oh, okay, okay, so, I'm coming from two different perspectives. So before I got this position, I was with, a homeless shelter, a men's homeless shelter that I ran for almost 7 years. And so, to piggyback off of some of the previous comments, some of the programs that are set up in Saginaw County, they're great programs, but what you find is that most of the programs have stipulations, so you still have this huge gap that you're not able to service. And that is, it's a huge strike, because again, going off the piggybacking with the felons, so they get out of incarceration, they serve their time, right? And then they get out and they still have these blows against them, because here are these programs, these county, state programs that are funded, and they are set up to supposedly assist, but they cannot get into the program. So all of these programs still have all of these stipulations and these barriers for a particular population. Like, even though programs will state they work for homeless, which is a whole population, you are still missing some of that homeless sector. So again, you leave people out here with no resources for education and no resources for a job. So what do? Most of them go back to crime. They go back to committing those crimes again, because it's what they know, and it's a way for them to, feed themselves or their family. So, and then now that I'm on the other side, which now I'm in government, and looking at it from a municipal standpoint, we still have all of these funded programs, these state-funded programs, but there are still barriers, because like for us, for Buena Vista Charter Township, we may not meet the population criteria for a particular program to assist us with economic development. The struggles that we go through as a municipality, either because they are looking at Saginaw County overall, and we don't fit that criteria, or the population, or the lack of education, there is always a barrier across the board. And I think a lot of times it frustrates me, because when I worked in the homeless population, I was frustrated because I felt like people were sitting making these decisions at the top level, and they had no ground experience, and they really didn't know. They had no idea that, oh, well, this sounds good, so we'll go ahead and we'll implement this. You need to talk to the people who are doing the work at ground level. And now, from a municipal standpoint, the same exact thing. You have people who are making these decisions, and they're supposed to assist, but there are still these barriers, and it's just, overall, it's just not right. I know every program has policies, you have to set policy, and I understand that. But you still are missing populations where it is necessary. We're a food desert. Why should we not have funding? I don't care if we have 1 or 2 people in a municipality, in the township. There should be assistance for that. So, anyway, I'm sorry.
I appreciate that,
Okay.
and just frankly, the spirit of this conversation is trying to be responsive to this idea that you are doing the work, have done the work. So if there is feedback to be given, you would have it. And so why I am here, why my team is here to come directly to speak to you, and so I want to make sure that in terms of follow-up from this meeting, that we can be as specific as possible with the things that you're raising, because that's what this is about. We get good policy, and we have people who are literally engaging with it every day, letting us know what works and what doesn't.
Can I ask you one more question? So what's the next step after this meeting?
So this is part of a tour that the governor and I will go on to 16 or 17 cities across the country. This is stop number 3. So we're doing this throughout the rest of September, all of October and November. What comes out of this, so one wants you to continue, we're gonna get an email out, feedback, follow up, etc. But what we will then come back to you with is we will put together think of it as a compilation of all, again, the practice program and policy ideas that we've heard in these conversations that are responsive to those 5 key areas. And then we want to have, again, feedback. This is what we heard, and these are the actions that we believe can be taken. These are actions that are to be taken at different city level, at the state level, executive or legislative, and at the federal level. And then understand that this is making sure that we heard what you said. And then what comes from that process then is this agenda on thriving cities. What does it mean to be a thriving city in Michigan? It means these things, and this is what we want to advocate for collectively. So that's ultimately where this goes, is that we have now what I hope is some community-built consensus through a collective agenda-setting process that we can all move forward and advocate for how to improve quality of life. That's what happens after this.
Thank you.
Okay, now, coming back.
Yeah, I was gonna-
And then back here.
I was gonna direct you through a program that has worked very well in the past through the Department of Natural Resources. And it is twofold. It is a.
Excuse me, could you say that again?
To the Department of Natural Resources.
Okay.
It worked very well in two areas. It was a summer jobs program for teens, middle school and high school teens that did two things. It provided them access to opportunities for employment in parks, in state parks and natural resources areas, so that they could be exposed to careers in natural resources. And at the same time, it provided an opportunity for counselors to help them to develop their plans and to work on resume ideas, work on presentation, the whole 9 yards. It was a very successful program, and it was I think the problem again is like anything else, the funding ran out. But what I saw in that program was that there are opportunities in local communities around their resources that the communities don't recognize. Because even though we were participating in that program with the state parks, we did not take that same program to the local areas, the local natural areas, the national area, wildlife area, and Wildlife Preserve, things of that nature. So we got cities, and probably the Department of Natural Resources has so many resources available to it. Like the local community that can have the ability to see what resources in their community can actually help develop the community can be developed around, or that can help to spur development in the community from the resource perspective, as opposed to just the economic development perspective. And there are people within the Department of Natural Resources who are not only effective at that, but skilled at it. And it may not take as much as it appears to reactivate or reinvest in that program, and then it would do serve several of those areas that are in this
Yeah, just two things, and I guess these are pet peeves of mine, but I want to approach them. One is the issue of exposure for some of our young people, addressing the generational issue that we were talking about earlier. We went through an experience with a major institution in our community building a brand new facility with public taxpayers' dollars. Many of you around the table know that the NAACP was engaged in a lot of discussion with Delta when they built the center around providing some opportunity for minority contractors' participation. But one of the things that we also talked about was providing young people with some exposure opportunities to the skilled trades, to the construction, to the building trades. And what I would like to propose is that as the state and the governor and the legislator start to look at ways when those proposals come up that have to be approved at the state level, that you build into those, consistent with some of the stuff we've been talking about with career education, CTE, and all of that, ways to provide a handful of young people, women and minorities, an opportunity to at least get a first-hand look at what those careers look like. Delta had to go to the legislature, ask for the money to put another $150,000 into the program and say, we're gonna provide an 8-month or a 10-month training opportunity, exposure opportunity for some urban youth to look at the skilled trades, to look at the building trades, to be on the site and work with career professionals. That's something that I would really like to see us do more of in the state, because as Carl and others are saying, how do you build a pipeline? What part of it is just to help educate the parents and these kids about what opportunities even exist. And if they never see it, then we've got an ongoing problem. The second issue is, and the mayor and Clint and Autumn and Jamie, all of you are on the city council, and even to some extent, even as a state legislator. The residency issue. As the NAACP, we asked, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, I think you were still on the city council, we FOIA'd the city with some of our public safety folks, where they actually live. We got people who perform services in this community who don't even live in the county, who live 2 and 3 counties away. In an emergency, it would take them 2 hours to even get here. So we were talking about, and what spurred this a little bit for me was the housing issue we were talking about earlier. Again, a proposal, just a suggestion. I'm not going to try to launch any kind of effort to overturn the residency issue, because I don't think we can even go down that path. But we certainly can figure out some ways to incentivize folks to live in the city, build houses in the city, buy houses in the city, and it's going to take some state support to do that. You talked about revenue sharing, and I think somebody mentioned earmarking some dollars. Well, why can't we figure out a way to encourage these people to live in the communities? I mean, if it takes a $5,000 commitment to help them, get a house or whatever it is, but if you're gonna be a police officer in this town, if you're gonna be a fireman in this town, live somewhere close to the town, okay? All right.
That's good.
That's fine.
That's good.
Get anyone to live in this town.
I'd like to follow up on that, because it's something that's really dear to the city council. And what we don't see is any support for trying to figure out a way to save our houses from being demolished because they became they were foreclosed on by the bank, or they were tax foreclosures, and by the time the state or the county land bank gets them, they're so far gone that it's hard to salvage them. We need some way to intervene early, so that we can do some of these kinds of things that Mr. Pruitt suggested, so we can do some of the housing programs that would help people find an affordable home. We have no way to intervene to save those houses. And, we've torn down probably 10,000 houses in the last 20 years, maybe more. And now part of that's a result, of course, of loss of population, but that begs the question, how do we get population back? And one of the ways is they incentivize the opportunity for people to do that, but the system doesn't allow us to do that. Nor are, and there's also, this is something I've addressed before, there are also, from a development standpoint, there are incentives to go elsewhere. We need to have those incentives to be in your urban cores, and we don't have them. We don't have those tools. In some way, the legislature can help us with that would be significant.
So, I know we're coming up on time. I want to give Representative Guerrero a chance to say something before we wrap up.
Yeah, I just want to thank you for being here. This is really important, because when you travel across the state and you hear these ideas, it allows us to build power in the legislature, because it's not just me coming forward with this idea, it's several members who represent large cities coming forward. And so I would ask this group to, the email address is up there, be very specific, because there may be some things that the executive branch can do through an executive order or through administrative rules that we could totally bypass the legislature, which is sometimes a very difficult beast. And so when you talk about the land bank, so I don't know if you're talking about when you pay taxes, if you pay that third year, you buy yourself 3 more years to be late on your taxes, which buys, 6 years for that house to fall into dilapidation. So be specific about that. Community Ventures was very specific, but if you send these in, then our office can certainly work with all of the other legislators that represent major cities to craft legislation that's representative of the things that we're talking about here. So that would be my one big request, because we talked a little bit broadly about a lot of issues, but we have to be specific to really drill down to how can we be most effective as the executive branch and as legislators to represent you and to get our cities moving and back on the right track.
Great, thank you, Representative, and I want to thank everyone again for taking the time here. Please, this is meant to be an
couple people who've been invited to the 12:30 meeting. It's on the second floor, so don't disappear.
Yeah, we don't wanna get together for a picture real quick before,
That's